Imagine an army of monks in white cloaks, wielding swords and managing bank accounts that would embarrass a modern tycoon. These men prayed, killed, and financed kings. They took vows of poverty and became rich beyond belief. They protected the Holy Sepulchre and frightened the Pope. They vanished and turned into legend. This is the story of the Templars, knights who had everything: faith, power, gold, and lost it all on a single Friday morning in 1307. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoy deep, unhurried stories, told with irony, sources, and shadows. And please tell us in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? We're genuinely curious. What corners of the world have joined us today? The history of the Templar Order is not just a textbook footnote about the Crusades. It's a laboratory of power, religion, and fear, showing how fanaticism can morph into a corporation and faith into a threat to kings. In the 12th century, they were night monks, sworn to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. By the 13th, they had become a global network, owning land, fleets, money, and banks. By the 14th, they stood before the Inquisition, confessing to things too disturbing to read aloud. Some say they found the Holy Grail. Others claim they knew too much. And some argue they were simply convenient scapegoats when royal coffers ran dry. But one thing is certain: the Templar Order never truly disappeared. Even if destroyed in flesh, the myth endured. And the deeper one digs into the sources, the clearer it becomes. They weren't saints or demons, but men, standing at the edge of two worlds. In 1099, after the siege of Jerusalem, the Crusaders achieved what had once seemed impossible. They captured the city known as the center of the world. But as the first Western warriors entered its gates, triumph gave way to massacre. The sword did not distinguish faiths. Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians, all were cut down. Pilgrims, the very people the Crusades were meant to protect, were now in the heart of helplessness. Amid these ashes and psalms, the story of the Templars begins. Around the year 1110, a small group of knights appeared. There were 9 of them, all French. They approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a proposal: allow us to live in the city and guard the roads for pilgrims, voluntary service without pay, without land, without titles. They were given quarters on the Temple Mount, where Solomon's temple once stood. Hence the name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Thus began an experiment infusing monk and warrior, prayer and warfare, purity and blood. At first, no one took them seriously. 9 knights were no army. They had no official rule, no hierarchy, no seal. But everything changed in 1129. At the Council of Troy, influenced by Bernard of Clairvaux, the Templars were recognized as an official monastic order with a formal code. This brought vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, the white cloak with the red cross, the iconic symbol of 2 knights on 1 horse, signifying poverty and brotherhood. This was not a mercenary corps. It was a devoted brotherhood where serving God meant serving with a sword. They weren't drawn by gold or fame, at least not initially. They were an army that belonged to no king, their sole loyalty to the Pope. That made them politically dangerous. They could fight, but answered to no monarch. The Middle Ages had no word for radicalization, but it knew its essence. The Templars followed strict discipline, prayer 9 times a day. No laughter, no jokes, no singing, no personal property, not even their clothes. Strict silence during meals. In battle, no retreat unless ordered. To die was an honor. To survive, a chance to fight again. The Templars became a symbol. Their white garb contrasted with the red blood of war. They were respected, feared, invoked. Their knights wore no jewelry, had no lovers, drank no wine. Across Europe, men joined in droves. Nobility, the poor, even repentant criminals. Because being a Templar meant more than a military career. It offered absolution and immortality. The Templars were born not from ideology, but from chaos. They were an answer to the question, what do you do when hell becomes reality and power fails? They were knights who believed that serving God could happen not just on knees, but on horseback, with a sword amid sand and betrayal. If the first chapter was about faith, this one is about stone, sweat, and calculation. Because belief can dwell in the heart, but an empire requires a map. And the Templars understood this perfectly. The Templars weren't just fighters. They were architects of a new geography. They built fortresses as strategic nodes, chapels as spiritual hubs, hospitals for the sick and the poor, warehouses for weapons, grain, cloth, and wine. All of it formed a network stretching from Jerusalem to Paris. Templar structures weren't random. Each fortress was an ideological model. High walls symbolized the distance from sin. The inner courtyard, order within the brotherhood. The chapel, the literal and spiritual heart of everything. Famous fortresses included Crac des Chevaliers, Syria, Castle in the Clouds, Safed, Galilee, one of the highest and most formidable bastions, Rochefort, Tortosa, Acre, fortress cities that held out for years. The Templars didn't just fight. They created safe passage networks for pilgrims. Across Europe and the Middle East, commanderies appeared, places where travelers could pray, rest, leave belongings, receive protection. These were sacred way stations, where the traveler became part of something greater. Templar fortresses were ahead of their time. Double walls for layered defense, sloped towers to deflect missiles, rainwater cisterns for long sieges, signal systems between towers. These castles didn't just endure. They broke more than one army. Everything in Templar architecture served the spirit of the order. Minimalism, functionality, ascetic detail. Some buildings had secret crypts used as vaults or for storing relics. In certain chapels, there are Latin graffiti and symbols still undeciphered. The Templars didn't just pray and fight. They built a world where those actions had meaning. Their architecture wasn't about beauty. It was about order, control, and transforming space into a symbol of faith. Their fortresses became a cartography of power, shaping not just battlefields, but generations of imagination. When we hear the word Templar, what do we imagine? A white cloak, a sword, a horse, a battle. But the reality of Templar life was not a heroic chronicle, but a routine. And then another routine, and another. This order was not built on mysticism, it was built on discipline. The daily life of a Templar was a fusion of asceticism, ritual, silence, and constant readiness for death. A Templar's day began before dawn, prayer in the chapel. Then came task assignments. Who stood watch on the walls? Who cleaned weapons? Who prepared the horses? No knight had a day off. Even in peace, The life of the order revolved around a cycle of prayer, labor, instruction, and silence. Meals were twice a day. The diet, modest. Bread, vegetables, legumes, sometimes fish. Meat, only on holidays or for the wounded. No talking during meals. One brother read scripture aloud. Each had a wooden bowl and cup. Personal property was forbidden. Even Bernard de Tremolay, Grand Master who died at Acre, ate from the same clay dish as the lowest knight. Because ritual equality wasn't a slogan, it was a rule. The white cloak was reserved for knights. Squires and servants wore dark ones. Cloaks, tunics, boots, all uniform. Jewelry was forbidden. Hair was kept short. Mustaches were allowed. Beards encouraged. Even clothing was a way to level all men before God and rule. Gerard de Ridefort, another Grand Master, was known to publicly rebuke knights who tried to wear noble trim or colorful belts. 9 prayers daily. Missing one required penance. Personal prayer was welcomed, but without theatrics. Time was arranged so that even on the road, in battle, or atop a fortress wall, a knight could still turn to God. Rule violations were not moral failings. They were threats to operational readiness. Punishments included public penance, removal of the white cloak, temporary exclusion, manual labor without weapons. One brother, chronicles say, pleaded before the Pope to be reinstated and was denied because exclusion from the order was spiritual death. Despite the ideals of brotherhood, the hierarchy was strict. Grand Master, elected for life. Marshal, in charge of military operations. Commanders, regional heads. Knight brothers, the backbone. Servants, armed assistants, not full members. Yet all lived, ate, and prayed together. Women were not admitted into the order. The rule forbade even touching a woman unnecessarily. A Templar was to despise bodily lust. Correspondence with women, limited, monitored. Still, female donors, like the Countess of Champagne, held influence. Their estates often became the first commanderies. In peacetime, Templars, trained, patrolled roads, managed property, studied texts. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, wrote before his arrest, "True battle is not in the field, but in the soul," because daily duty was more complex than fighting Saracens. The life of a Templar was a system that replaced the world. They were not individuals with personal stories. They were a mechanism of faith, duty, and silence. Tales of heroism began with morning prayers. Legends with grooming a horse. In medieval Europe, where kings went bankrupt after every war, the Templars had something more potent than the cross on their tunics. A network of depositories, a stable transfer system, and the trust of monarchs. This is how an order sworn to poverty became the most reliable bank on the continent. Pilgrims heading to the Holy Land couldn't carry chests of gold across dangerous roads. The Templars offered a solution. Deposit your money in Paris, receive a written note, withdraw the same amount in Acre, minus the broken legs and robbed dignity. It was Europe's first system of checks and long-distance banking. In the heart of Paris stood the Temple, a fortress that served as the order's financial brain. It was managed by Theodoric de Champ, a commander with a sharp pen and even sharper ledgers. He kept records of royal clients, including Henry III of England. Popes, nobles, and monarchs all stored wealth with the Templars because the order didn't gamble with funds. They wrote every denier into their ledgers in crisp, Latin ink. One of the order's most famous treasurers was Everard de Bar, who not only handled aristocratic donations, but used early forms of investment strategy. Funds deposited with the Templars could be placed into rental estates, trade caravans, even shipbuilding. At a time when many nobles couldn't write, de Bar ran something close to a medieval internal stock market. The Templars didn't just safeguard, they lent. Kings with empty coffers came to the order and received loans in exchange for castles, lands, or privileges. England, France, Aragon, all were debtors of the order. Venetian merchants, regular clients. In some regions, Templars ran customs posts on behalf of kingdoms. The order's financial empire relied on commanderies across Europe, a single reporting language, Latin, seal-based authentication, their own couriers acting as armored pigeons. They had intelligence networks, archives, accounting systems, all in the name of God. When French King Philip IV fell into financial trouble, he turned to Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master. Historians believe Molay refused to forgive the king's debts because the order was not a private bank. It was a sacred institution. That refusal may have been the first nail in the Templars' coffin. The Templars had no ATMs, but they had trust, not in the system, but in an order that counted in silence and stored coins more securely than any crown. Their financial empire wasn't their goal. It was the byproduct of discipline, reputation, and the geography of power. They did not retreat, they did not bargain, and they never returned if they rode forward. On the battlefield, a Templar was not a warrior. He was an institution. He owned no personal sword, had no right to personal fear. He had a cross and a rule that commanded him never to turn back without permission, even from hell itself. Templar units were unique. They were not part of royal armies. They fought independently with orders not from a king, but from the Pope himself. This made them not allies, but an autonomous strike force. They didn't wait for signals. They arrived and broke the front line. Their strategy, not knightly gallantry, but clinical efficiency. Templars struck in a wedge formation with a corps of heavy cavalry and mobile infantry on the flanks. They trained to charge in ritual silence, no battle cries, only the cross on their chest. The first blow, maximum damage and psychological shock. Then came the finishing. Retreat was only allowed with the marshal's approval. Unauthorized withdrawal was spiritual suicide. The story of Gerard de Riedfort. In 1187, at the disastrous Battle of Hattin, Gerard de Riedfort, Grand Master of the Order, led his knights in a frontal assault against Saladin's army. Outnumbered more than 10 to 1, the Templars fought to the last. Riedfort was captured. 2 years later, released. He returned to battle. In 1189, during the siege of Acre, he died. Strategically, a failure, but he embodied fanatical obedience to the rule. The defense of Tortosa, 12 against 500, Guillaume de Sonac, commander of Tortosa, in 1240, held a fortress with just 12 knights against an army of 500. The city survived through water, prayer, and iron gates. That siege became a template for the Templar defense, a small garrison, fortified spiritually and physically, holding off enemies through architecture and inner conviction. A Templar's weapon was not a tool, it was a ritual object. Before battle, prayer, confession, sometimes final communion, because every charge could be a last one. No ornate swords. Shields bore only the red cross. Battle cry, non nobis Domine, not unto us, O Lord. The mind of a Templar, death without fear. A Templar was trained not to fear. From childhood, fasting, silence, obedience. In adulthood, he lived not for himself, but for the vow. In combat, they did not scream, did not charge alone, did not break formation. They moved like a mechanism and vanished like a legend. Templar warfare was a form of worship. It wasn't adventure. It was a rite. And death wasn't failure, but a passage into higher war. They weren't invincible, but even their defeats became myths that inspired armies for generations. No enemy ever destroyed the Templar Order in battle. They were broken in chambers, dungeons, and inquisitorial courts. By the early 14th century, the Order had everything: military prestige, financial power, international autonomy. That was too much for one monarch. Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Order, was obsessed with control. So on Friday, October 13th, 1307, one of the largest mass arrests in history began, a coordinated raid on all Templar commanderies in France. The accusations were wild: spitting on the cross, sodomy, idol worship involving cats. Some brothers confessed under torture, others stayed silent. The interrogation records remain and read like a mix of absurdity and fear. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was arrested in Paris. Initially, he confessed, but later, in public, recanted everything. In 1314, he was taken to execution. On the Ile de la Cité in Paris, across from Notre Dame, he stood calmly in the flames. Before dying, he called upon God to judge the Pope and the King. Historians note, the Pope died within a month. The King, that same year. Another Templar, Hugues de Perrot, refused to confess even under torture. He was executed. His refusal is noted in the inquisitorial record as an aggravating factor. Pope Clement V initially did not support the destruction of the Order, but under pressure from the king, threats of schism and political debt, he dissolved the Order at the Council of Vienne in 1312. No definitive proof was found, no unanimous agreement, only a papal act to prevent further chaos. Officially, the Order's properties were given to the Knights Hospitaller, but in practice, much of their wealth went to the French crown. The debts were gone, so were those who remembered them. After de Molay's death, the myths began. He passed on the Order's secrets. A hidden heir survives. The treasure lies buried beneath Paris. But the truth is simpler. The Order, forged in discipline and faith, wasn't destroyed by sword, but by decree, signature, and ambition. The Templars didn't fall in glory. They vanished as a system, deemed uncontrollable, betrayed by those they'd served, protected, and enriched. And yet, their myth survived. After 1312, the Order of the Templars was officially dissolved, but in reality, it transformed into an idea more enduring than any fortress in the Holy Land. By the 15th century, stories began to circulate about surviving brothers who preserved the Order's secrets, escaped eastward, or transformed into another organization. The most popular theory? The Templars were the forefathers of Freemasonry. Though there's no direct evidence, the similarity of rituals, symbols, and organizational structure gives the myth traction. In the 18th century, Templar aesthetics became fashionable among European nobility. Cross designs, lodge names, and ceremonial attire were used to signal elite brotherhoods. The Order's secrecy, its fall through betrayal, the legend of a hidden treasure, all made it a factory of symbols. In the 20th century, the image of the Templar permeated cinema, literature, and video games. Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, Assassin's Creed. Each presents the Order, either directly or through adapted forms. It's no longer a historical fact. It's a cultural code. The Templar stands for loyalty, conspiracy, forgotten truth. In some countries, groups calling themselves Neo-Templars emerged, people claiming spiritual descent from the original order. Some focus on charity, others on historical reenactment, and a few on rituals that give the Vatican mild panic attacks. Even in pop culture, in RPG games, Templars often represent the elite defenders of either truth or illusion. In conspiracy theories, they run banks, governments, and, naturally, the Vatican. This is a new mythology, where historical fact is only an outline. Why did the Templars become this? Because they are an archetypal story. Warrior monks, powerful but betrayed, leaving not a body, but a legend. The Templars became a shadow of the Middle Ages, reappearing in the mirror of each new century. In the 15th, as vanished avengers. In the 18th, as a symbol of aristocratic secrecy. In the 21st, as a hybrid of faith, counterculture, and marketable icon. The Templars were a brotherhood, but their legacy lives on as a structure, an idea, and a warning. In finance, they created the first international transfer system. Instead of moving coins, they moved trust through paper and seals. This principle became the foundation of modern banking. Their accounting, auditing, and reporting methods were centuries ahead of their time. In legal terms, the Templars were the first transnational corporation, autonomous commanderies in different countries, accountable only to the Pope, with their own rules, statutes, and disciplinary systems. This was a prototype of modern global organizations, and at the same time, a warning that unchecked power attracts destruction. Architecturally, they built functional, fortified, minimalist complexes. Their focus on defense, logistics, and simplicity shaped later military and religious structures. Their aesthetic left a mark. Geometry, purpose over ornament, spiritual in design. In spiritual terms, they broke the mold of Christianity as peace-loving and submissive. The Templar was faith with a sword, ritual, and hierarchy. They influenced knightly ethics in Europe, reshaped the idea of just war, and contributed to the notion of sacred political mission. But perhaps their most powerful legacy is the legend mechanism itself. Because when the order was destroyed, a narrative took its place, and stories, it turns out, outlive even the strongest institutions. The Templars remind us that a global force can be built from nothing, that discipline and reputation outweigh armies, and that even the most idealistic system is vulnerable to fear, envy, and politics. The Templars are not just history. They are a blueprint, a precedent, a metaphor. They taught the West how to merge faith and logistics, spirituality, and governance. And their fall taught us even the mightiest structure can collapse if it is feared more than it is respected. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Let us know in the comments what story you'd like to hear next. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. And tell us, From which city and country are you listening? Because, like the order itself, history lives on through community.